Look, I think that the problem with education is that it focuses too much on facts, too much on rigor, and not enough on
Too much on
imagination.
facts. Do you hear yourself? It's
Hey, 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 welcome back to the channel. Genuinely glad you are here today because this one is something else. So we have got an interviewer sitting down with Shwin Jang, a Chinese-Canadian educator who went massively viral for predicting some major world events before they happened. People started calling him China's Nostradamus, but the moment he blew up, the questions started piling up too, about his credentials, his methods, his theories, and exactly whose interests his message might be serving. And this interview does not hold back at all. Stick with this one all the way through because the second half especially takes a turn that I genuinely did not see coming, and I think it will change how you look at the whole conversation. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from right now. I always love seeing how far this community reaches, and it means a lot when you show up like this. All right, let us get into it.
But hold on, they allow you to be on this show, they allow you to be on YouTube, you get past the great firewall that you criticized in that CNN piece. How come?
Look, the reality is that the best way to understand my situation in China is I'm essentially a Martian on Earth talking to Martians back at home in Mars. Like, I am not part of the Chinese system. I'm on YouTube, which is blocked in China.
How do
I
they
speak
allow you
English.
to be on YouTube? This is what I'm not understanding. If you're blocked in China, why do they allow you to become... You're very prominent now. You're famous in the West. I'm sure the Chinese government has noticed that.
Well, most Chinese will have access to a VPN device, and that's what I use in order to access the internet.
You wrote for CNN that the Chinese government has built the Great Firewall to monitor and control their citizens' pursuit of truth. Does China control what you say now?
China does not control what I say because, again, I'm not talking to Chinese people. I'm talking to Westerners.
Hold on, that's what most people would say is China's great benefit. They might see, your critics might say, they're using you as a propagandist to come and say this stuff about Iran and the US on behalf of China. That would be what your critics would say.
Look, the reality is that this is a fair and legitimate criticism that I've been contemplating for the past 3-4 weeks. Because, when I first started this YouTube channel like 2 years ago, I was expecting 5,000 viewers who would have a passion for learning, who would be as engaged with literature and geopolitics as I was. And over the past month, I've blown up all across the internet. And I don't think this is organic. But so I wonder if there are some governments or some entities that believe that my message should be amplified. It is possible I'm a useful idiot. And I suspect that there are many entities around the world who would like to amplify my message, including the Chinese government, but also including the Russian government, including some aspects of the American government, including some people who are hostile towards war.
I appreciate your candor. You said you blew up on the internet. You did go viral over your Iran predictions. But on your YouTube page, as people now start to acquaint themselves with you and familiarize with your work, people have been slightly surprised to see some of your other stuff. You have a series of lectures focused on secret societies where you argue that groups like the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Jesuits are at the center of world control. People would say you sound kind of crazy when you talk about the Illuminati. It's the kind of thing you hear in Dan Brown novels.
Right. So I'm trying a new approach to pedagogy and to scholarship, which is speculative analysis. So I went to Yale and I received a very rigorous classical education. I'm very happy and proud that I went to Yale. But what I discovered in life, as I stumbled through life, is that what I was taught at Yale doesn't really apply to real life. People with the most rational, logical arguments don't usually win. And people who are the most progressive, the most enlightened aren't usually the ones in power. So I was determined, just for my own personal benefit, to develop a new system which would give me better insight into how power works in the world. And so I started something called predictive history. And the very idea of predictive history is this: how do we know if our understanding of history is correct? And the answer is, well, we can make predictions based on our historical framework, and seeing if these predictions work out or not, validate our historical models. So what I've discovered is that if you have a combination of game theory, historical patterning, and eschatology, then this gives you a pretty deep insight into how the world will turn out. And secret societies are very much an important aspect of eschatology.
This is the moment where the entire credibility question gets laid bare. because the interviewer asked Shwin something that most people watching were already thinking: does China control what you say? And what followed was one of the most fascinating deflections I have seen in a long time. Here is what gets me. Shwin is living in Beijing. He is on YouTube, which is blocked in China. He is using a VPN to bypass the very firewall he once wrote about for CNN. And his answer to why China allows this is essentially, I am like a Martian talking to other Martians. That is his explanation. A Martian. You have to understand what is actually being said here. He is not denying that the Chinese government has noticed him. He is not denying that his message benefits certain governments. What he is saying is that because he talks to Westerners and not Chinese citizens, somehow that makes it fine. But that logic only works if you think propaganda has to be aimed inward to count as propaganda. History tells us that is not how it works at all. And then, and this is the part that genuinely surprised me, Shwin himself said it. He said it is possible he is a useful idiot. He said he suspects the Chinese government, the Russian government, and other entities are amplifying his message. He volunteered that. Nobody forced it out of him. Now I want to be fair here. Admitting that possibility takes a certain kind of self-awareness. But here is what people are missing. Acknowledging you might be a useful idiot and then continuing to operate the same way is not self-awareness. That is just a disclaimer. There is a difference between saying I might be wrong and actually stopping to examine whether the message you are spreading serves powerful interests more than it serves truth. And then he pivots straight into secret societies, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Jesuits at the center of world control. The interviewer said, people would think you sound crazy, and honestly that reaction is completely understandable, because we just went from geopolitical analysis to Dan Brown territory in about 30 seconds. What I find genuinely interesting is that Shwin went to Yale. He received what he himself called a rigorous classical education, and his conclusion from all of that is that rational logical arguments do not win and enlightened people are not the ones in power. Look, Aaron, there is a version of that observation that is worth taking seriously. Power does not always go to the most qualified. That is documented history, but the leap from that observation to secret societies controlling the world is enormous, and that leap matters because it shapes everything else he says after it.
I'll come back to secret societies. A couple of things you mentioned there. You said you were at Yale. Just to be clear, your degree was in English literature, was it not, at Yale? It wasn't in international relations or national security. You're an English lit graduate, and you're not a professor. I know it's your YouTube moniker, but you're a high school teacher. You're not actually a professor.
Right. So when I went to Yale, I was actually a math and physics major. I was declared a math and physics major, but the Yale English department was very strong, and so I switched majors. So I have actually both a math background as well as an English background. That's why my system of analysis can seem strange to people, because I'm combining a multidisciplinary approach to my thinking. Yeah. And I'm not a professor. I'm not a professor. But I never said I was a professor. It's the internet who called me professor.
Hold on. You don't call yourself Professor Jiang on your YouTube channel.
I do now, but when I first started out, if you go way back to my early lectures...
It doesn't matter when you first started out. You do call yourself Professor Jiang and you're not a professor.
Look, there's a guy on the internet who calls himself the God. Have you interviewed him yet? And asked him why he calls himself the God?
I think I'm good friends with a radio host called Charlemagne the God, but no one actually thinks he's a God. People actually think you're a professor. Just sticking with your analysis, you just said speculative analysis. To many people, that sounds like you're just making it up. You're speculating.
Look, I think that the problem with education is that it focuses too much on facts, too much on rigor, and not enough on imagination.
Too much on facts. Do you hear yourself? It sounds... what do you mean too much on facts?
Look, I know this sounds strange, but there is a difference between facts and truth, right? Facts are what can be independently verified by other sources. Truth is a deep understanding of the world that allows you to understand why things are the way they are, as well as make certain predictions. We used to be a people, a human species that was very focused on truth seeking. And that's why religion was such an important part of our lives, because God, prayer was very important to help us understand our place in the world, where we came from, what we're doing here, and where we're going. And now we just focus on facts, on making sure that you can memorize all the elements of the periodic table, on making sure that
when you talk about secret societies, I guess people want to say, well, where's the factual evidence? Where's the evidence? You said, I think.
This part right here is where the foundation completely cracks open, because the interviewer did something simple and devastating. He just asked Shwin to confirm his own credentials. Your degree was in English literature. You are not a professor. You are a high school teacher. That is what was said. And what followed was one of the most uncomfortable pivots I have seen. Shwin said he started as a math and physics major before switching to English. Which, okay, that is fine. But switching majors does not make you a geopolitical analyst. And more importantly, it does not explain why you call yourself Professor Jang on a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of followers. When the interviewer pressed him directly, "You do call yourself Professor Jang," Shwin tried to deflect by comparing himself to a radio host who calls himself a god. And the interviewer immediately shut that down by saying people actually think you are a professor. That comparison does not land because the stakes are completely different. One is clearly a nickname. The other is a title that implies academic authority on matters of war, geopolitics, and international relations. And here is why this matters beyond just a title. When someone presents themselves as a professor analyzing game theory and predicting wars, audiences trust that framing. People share those videos believing there is an academic foundation behind the claims. The label does real work in building credibility. Removing the label does not undo that work after the fact. Then comes the moment. Shwin said the problem with education is that it focuses too much on facts, too much on rigor, and not enough on imagination. And the interviewer said, "On facts, do you hear yourself?" I want to sit with that for a second because I think people might hear that line and think it is just chaotic. But there is actually a worldview underneath it that is worth understanding. Shwin is drawing a distinction between facts and truth. Facts being things independently verified. Truth being a deeper understanding that allows prediction, and on paper that philosophical distinction exists in academic circles. The problem is that framework becomes dangerous the moment it is used to bypass accountability, because once you say imagination matters more than facts, you can justify almost any claim by calling it speculative truth-seeking, and the interviewer saw that immediately. Where is the evidence becomes an unanswerable question when facts are framed as the enemy of deeper understanding.
I think the Jesuits control the Vatican. First of all, there's nothing wrong with Jesuits. Good people, I know many of them. Second of all, there's only ever been one pope who's a Jesuit, and he's gone. So people would wonder, like, facts are important to your evidence. And people would say that it's not just fun and games when you're doing speculation on YouTube. They look at some of your rhetoric and they see that you don't just criticize Zionism or Israel, as many people legitimately do. You talk about this pretty far-right concept of Pax Judaica, a new world order centered around Israel. You have a video called Dawn of the Jews, in which you seek to answer the question, why is it that Jews are so dominant? Surely you understand why a lot of people think at best you're trafficking in pretty anti-Semitic tropes, and at worst, you're a card-carrying anti-Semite when they see that stuff.
Okay, well, that is a very strong accusation. So can you please tell me what specifically I've said that you find offensive?
When you do a video called Dawn of the Jews, why is it that Jews are so dominant? You don't find that offensive?
I never said Jews were dominant. What I said in my lecture was that the Jewish identity was created by the Persian Empire in order to better control the Levant. And if you read the Bible, that's exactly what you can derive from it. If you go to my lecture, Dawn of the Jews, you will see that I use the Bible as my primary source, and then I analyze what the Bible is saying. The problem is that most people don't read the Bible.
But people who came up with Pax Judaica are not biblical scholars. They're the modern white supremacist far right.
Sorry. What is wrong with the term Pax Judaica?
You tell me. What does it mean?
It just means that there is an entity in the Middle East, Israel, that is able to dominate the Middle East, very much along the lines of Pax Americana and Pax Britannica and Pax
But you didn't say
Magalica.
Pax Israelica. You said Pax Judaica. That implies all Jews. You know the tropes about Jews running the world. I wouldn't be okay if you said Iran is dominant, Saudi Arabia is dominant, Pax Muslimica. In fact, you know that there are many racists in the West who do believe that Islam and Muslims are trying to take over the world. I find that equally offensive.
Right. So I'm using a Latin convention, and so the Latin convention would be Pax Judaica. It would not be Pax Israelica.
But you know where this concept comes from. It exists in far right online circles. It's not some academic term.
Do you believe that the Greater Israel Project is a far-right conspiracy theory?
No.
What is it then?
I think it's a very real project being carried out by the Israeli government. I just don't call it Pax Judaica.
Right, okay. So the difference between the Greater Israel Project and Pax Judaica is this. Greater Israel Project is what the Israelis believe that Yahweh, their God, promised to their ancestor Abraham in the Bible. And this extends from the now to the Euphrates. And I could have just used Greater Israel Project, but I want to differentiate because I believe that Pax Judaica is not an empire run by Jews, for Jews, by Jews. It is an empire run by transnational capital and secret societies in order to create an AI surveillance state throughout the Middle East.
And
you
this
actually
is,
listen.
just to be clear, and this is speculative analysis. This is not based on facts, as you say.
So it is based on speculative analysis, based on history, historical patterns. It's also based on connecting the dots. Because if you just look at what Netanyahu says, if you actually just go and watch on YouTube,
I know what Netanyahu says. We're in agreement on how bad Netanyahu is, how expansionist is. I'm talking about the language you use, the milieu you're in. Let me ask you this before we wrap up. What are your own politics? Where do you place yourself on the political spectrum?
I believe I've always been on the left. So I believe that wealth redistribution is very important. I believe in freedom of speech. I am anti-war. I'm anti-empire. I believe in individual autonomy. And so unfortunately, I used to be left, but I think that like given my preferences and given my politics, I believe most people would consider me on the far right nowadays. And that's unfortunate.
Oh. This final stretch is where everything Shwin built across this entire conversation comes apart in one clean sweep. The interviewer pointed out that the people who originally pushed Pax Judaica as a concept are not biblical scholars. They are far-right online circles. That is not an opinion. That is documented. And what does Shwin do? He asks, what is wrong with the term? Genuinely, as if the origin of a concept does not shape what it carries into every conversation where it gets used. You have to understand why that question is so revealing. When someone borrows language from an extreme fringe and then acts confused about why people are concerned, that confusion itself is a signal. Because language does not exist in a vacuum, words carry the history of who used them and why. Pax Judaica was not sitting in some neutral academic archive waiting to be discovered. It existed in a very specific online ecosystem, and Shwin chose to bring it into his content. The interviewer made a point that I think is genuinely important here. He said he would find it equally offensive if someone used a similar framework targeting Muslims as a group, and that consistency matters. Because the issue was never about which group is being discussed. The issue is the framing itself, the idea that a single ethnic or religious identity is the organizing force behind global power. That framing has caused tremendous harm historically regardless of which group it targets. And then the final question, where do you place yourself on the political spectrum? Shwin said he believes in wealth redistribution, freedom of speech, being anti-war, anti-empire, individual autonomy. By his own description, he sounds like a classic progressive. And then he said, most people would consider me on the far right nowadays. And that's unfortunate. That one line is more honest than anything else said in this entire conversation, because what Shwin is describing, without fully realizing it, is the exact pipeline that pulls people from legitimate anti-establishment frustration into far-right adjacent thinking. It starts with real grievances, skepticism of empire, opposition to endless wars, distrust of mainstream media. All of that is valid. But somewhere along the way, the analysis stops being grounded and starts being speculative. Facts become less important than patterns. Patterns become less important than narratives. And suddenly the language you are using comes from places you would never have associated yourself with 5 years earlier. That is not unique to Shwin. That journey has played out publicly for a lot of people across the political landscape in recent years, and understanding how it happens is more useful than just pointing at the destination and saying that is wrong. What Shwin called unfortunate, I would call a warning sign worth paying attention to. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.